The elusive search for home. To have an innate knowledge of yourself and yet doubt yourself can feel like being in a prison created by other people's ideas and imagined judgments. In that prison, it is the constant search for a true home that keeps you going, a constant belief that there is a place of safety, nourishment, and love that is given to you unconditionally. You continue to search for this experience because you know it exists and can instinctively remember it. The experience of being in your mother's womb. In that womb, you were fed, you were safe, and you were comfortable. On a deep, nonverbal plane of knowledge, you know it. You have been there. You have had a home, a paradise, and being born, you were subsequently banished from it. Most people in the West are familiar with the biblical story of the banishment from the Garden of Eden. Adam and Eve lived there happily, with no worries whatsoever, and then they were banished from it. Looking at this myth from the perspective of our physical body, you can see why it exists. The experience of being in paradise and then being banished from it is one we all come into this world having known. It is the experience of being connected to an umbilical cord in the womb and then being banished from the womb into an uncomfortable and dangerous surroundings. In the biblical story, Adam and Eve sinned, quote unquote, and were punished by having to go live in a world where they were subject to the pains of birth and death and where they must work for their daily bread. This is the world we are born into. But not in every version of the story did Adam and Eve sin. There are alternate versions of this story where the heroes choose to leave paradise on their own. Do you remember what the sin was that Adam and Eve were banished for? In the original story, they were banished from their paradise because they ate from the forbidden fruit of the tree of knowledge of good and evil. In the alternate version, Adam and Eve decide to take a journey into duality and polarity. They had curiosity and were striving for knowledge and new experiences. They couldn't get that in paradise, where nothing ever changes or challenges. When living in paradise, there is a desire to gain knowledge through direct experience. In experiential embodied reality, you long for paradise. It's one of those "the grass is always greener on the other side of the fence" type ironies. Unconsciously, you yearn to be back in paradise, at home, which is essentially a feeling of safety, nourishment, and connection. But you live in a world of experience, one that you need to have a physical, mortal, and vulnerable body to appreciate. But the experience of longing for that paradise safety remains, and you look for it everywhere, in drugs, in food, in sex, in television, and in codependent relationships. You may find yourself stuck in your comfort zone for this same reason, where you become comfortable and feel safe, quote unquote, in a situation even though it doesn't fulfill or express the real you, and where your true curiosity cannot be shared. The comfort zone is a distorted form of paradise because it feels safe, but in order to grow, you must be willing to express your curiosity and desire for something better. This will mean leaving paradise, working hard and truly experiencing life with its joys and pains to thrive as the authentic you. The world we live in isn't safe, and even if you are living a lie or living in your comfort zone, something could happen to completely shake up your world. The true feeling of home can only be found through the internal connection to the source of nourishment and love you are building, because that is when you successfully bridge the gap between paradise and earth, between unity and connection and life in the form of duality. Some say that our sole purpose for being born is to bridge that gap, to create a world where we have it all, to be mortal and yet aware of our own immortality and connectivity with a spiritual source. Whatever you believe about this being our purpose, the fact remains, you are here, you yearn to be there, and, at least internally, it is possible to recreate that feeling. And externally you can help create a more collaborative world by radiating connection from within you wherever you go. You can help create a world that is fair, equitable, and, if not safe from natural disasters, at least one where it is safe for us to be ourselves with each other. There is another very important perspective on the Adam and Eve story to share. It is the perspective that as you grow up, you are ingrained with ideas of what good and evil are, conditioned by your parents and your environment. It is only when you start to understand your environment's concept of good versus evil, once you take a bite off that apple of belief, that you are banished from paradise. It wasn't that eating the apple was a sin, it was your understanding of the concept of good versus evil that made you start to experience an aspect of yourself as sinful. When you start to experience yourself as sinful, you are banished from your childhood innocence, and you start to form an alternative self. An alternative self based on feelings of shame, guilt, and regret. And you start to live in fear of consequences. When you start to see yourself as evil, or just plain old bad, you start to close yourself off to the natural love and nourishment that live inside of you, and to close yourself off to innocence and paradise, because you no longer believe that you deserve them. But when you realize that the love and nourishment you want are feelings you have already experienced before coming into this world and as a baby, it makes it much easier to find them again in the present. All you need do is remember that paradise does exist. Do the being in connection practice and receive it into yourself. In the next chapter on the pillar of receptivity, there will be much more information for you about how to better, receive this into yourself, and much more about overcoming shame and regret. Action step. Back in the womb meditation. Description. Close your eyes and take a few deep breaths. Imagine what it might be like to be back in the womb. Imagine the safety and the unconditional love and nourishment you receive there. The memory of that place exists within you, so invite that memory to the surface. The memory will be tactile, not verbal and not visual. So pay attention to your body's experience, not your mind's. Describe what you experienced in your journal.